Okay, I want to try to somehow communicate how astrology helped me um, heal from depression and disease. I had Lyme disease. I was infected twice with ticks, and each time I took the 30-day antibiotics and felt better initially, and then the symptoms eventually came back. And rather than go back in for sort of toxic overloads of antibiotics, which is, if you can even find a doctor who will do that, that's about the only course of treatment offered, other than they start shipping you from specialist to specialist, imagining up all sorts of things that are wrong with you based on symptoms without having any understanding of the cause. And that's important because most diseases, Lyme disease is very rare in that at least the trigger, there's a known trigger. You got bit by the tick that's infected with this specific spirochete, and that takes over in areas of your body, and the physical manifestations occur depending on where those spirochetes decide to sort of lodge themselves into your system. They like the joints a lot. They like to get in the brain a lot. So depending on where they colonize and start taking over, your symptoms, arise. And then a doctor says, ooh, those symptoms line up with this disease, therefore, that's kind of what happens once your symptoms come back. After you take the 30 days of antibiotics, most people feel better. And then when their symptoms come back and they go back in, and the doctor, I think by CDC, it's pretty complicated stuff, but it's hard to get a doctor for Lyme disease. Anyway, that's a long aside. But that's part of the confusion. Lyme disease is this weird sort of political football of a disease. If you look into it, it's not as simple to navigate how to heal Lyme disease as you would think. So I recommend, I went holistic in every way. I did a lot of detoxing. I cut out all of my, toxic diet, sugars, caffeine, alcohol. I just cold turkey. Lots of any preservative filled foods, the list of ingredients with all the stuff you can't pronounce. Like, I just cut that stuff out completely and just ate as clean as I could, and that was a big part of it. And I took a lot of vitamins and mineral supplements as well, and did a lot of cleansing, a lot of chlorella and a lot of other sort of things, charcoal and clay, bentonite clay. I can't even remember all the things that I sort of did to help cleanse my system. Those of you who are from my hometown who grew up in Rapids have a lot of metals in your system from those paper mills and that stuff floating around in the air. We all do, and we all could benefit from a good cleanse. That said, okay, now we're getting into, so it took a while. Those changes take some time to reap the benefits of them. You reap some benefits right away, but when you get as sick as I was before you decide to do anything really positive and permanent about it, as far as lifestyle changes, most people probably wouldn't have been as stubborn as me. And I tried to sort of mind over matter Lyme disease and not really deal with it in a responsible way. I knew that cutting out all of these things out of my diet were going to help me, and I would flirt with that. When I would get really sick, I would cut those things out, and I would start feeling better, and then I would start eating sugar and drinking coffee again, and then maybe having a beer at night, and then, okay, I don't feel so bad, and then a couple months later, the symptoms would all flare again. So eventually, all that stuff piled up, and then even quitting all of those habits didn't help anymore, not initially. If I ate those, I felt extremely worse. But now I was in a deeper, more chronic situation by that point, because I let my body get there by not doing anything about my lifestyle choices as far as the toxic environment that I was introducing into my body on a daily basis, and offering these Lyme spirochetes a perfect atmosphere to flourish. That was on me. So I changed all of that. I changed my habits. And I was but there was a lot of people were judging me based on the way I was healing and the pace at which I was healing and the fact that I wasn't going into a quote-unquote normal doctor, and and them not researching Lyme at all to any effect where they would understand that it's not as simple as all that, even if that's the course of action I wanted to take. And so yeah, it gets really depressing when you're all alone and sick and you're losing energy. I didn't have any energy at all. Excuse me. And I had a newborn that I could barely do. I'd been dreaming about being a father my whole life, and suddenly I have a kid and I can't do anything with her because I'm lifeless and depressed. And yeah, it was tough. That was, the depression. I got so lifeless, and everything was dark. I can't even sort of explain how many dimensions of darkness were sort of creeping into my whole worldview. Everybody was fake, and everything was just so superficial, and yeah, the world wasn't a place that felt like I wanted to be in it at that point, from my perspective. So luckily I stuck stubbornly to the holistic healing, and I stuck to no sugar, no caffeine, no alcohol. I even cut out gluten a lot there for a while. At a certain point I had been a vegetarian for a long time, and when I got really sick, a lot of the judgment that was coming in was saying I'll never heal without eating meat. And so I introduced eggs into my diet for about 6 months there. And frankly, those were technically the worst 6 months of my life. I think they were going to be anyway, just because of the trajectory that I was on. But at about that time, I quit the eggs. I got it in my head that I'm done. These are not. Actually, I think it was right after I got salmonella. That was a good sign. Said, hey, okay, it's time to cut these eggs out. They're not helping. And so from then on, that was another thing that changed in my diet that helped a lot, I think. But I started seeing results. My depression started going down. It wasn't so deep and constant and just crippling, and a little bit of energy started coming back after a month or two, 3 months, 4 months of eating really well. And I kind of feel like I sort of survived the depression, and there was definitely there's a lot of suicidal moments in those months and days. Yeah, that's what darkness and depression is. It's brutal. And I feel like I survived that and came out the other side before I rediscovered astrology. I'd studied astrology when I was younger, and it was just something in the far back of my head, and I never looked at it anywhere near as deep as I do now. And I sort of rediscovered it after I feel like I'd already done all of the hard work of quitting these habits and excuse me, doing a lot of research. I did so much research and made so many little changes in my habits, just slowly adopting better habits and dropping old bad habits. I quit chewing tobacco. I forget, that was the hardest thing of all the things that I did. And now, but I was still in a funk when I sort of came back to astrology. And when I came back to it, it sort of kind of came back to me, via the magic of serendipity and whatever on the internet. And I'd never looked up anything on the internet before on astrology, and I realized that you can look up where the planets are currently, real easily. And I realized you can look up where they were at any point in time in history.